Well, I'm back, ready to dive into the next bunch of Star Trek films, this time centered around the cast of The Next Generation. The Next Generation films picked up immediately after the events of the Next Generation TV series and did away with all the numbered titles of the Star Trek films. The TNG films began with Star Trek Generations and continued onward with Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek Insurrection, and then finished up with Star Trek Nemesis. Star Trek Generations is a 1994 film that came out in November '94, only a few months after the series finale of The Next Generation that previous May. The film stars Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard, Jonathan Frakes as William Riker, Brent Spiner as Data, LeVar Burton as Geordi LaForge, Michael Dorn as Worf, Gates McFadden as Beverly Crusher, and Marina Sirtis as Deanna Troi. The film also introduces Alan Ruck as John Harriman, the captain of the Enterprise B, and stars Malcolm McDowell as Tolian Soren, the film's villain. The film also sees William Shatner, James Doohan, and Walter Koenig reprise their roles briefly as James Kirk, Montgomery Scott, and Pavel Chekhov, respectively. The film opens with a prologue that depicts Kirk, Scotty, and Chekhov attending the maiden voyage of the new Excelsior-class Enterprise B. Kirk gives his life to save the ship from an energy ribbon and continues onward with the Next Generation cast as they discover a plot by Soren to manipulate the course of the ribbon and enter a realm called the Nexus. From there, they race to stop Soren from committing genocide in order to gain access to the mysterious realm. Generations is one of the films in the series that tends to get overlooked, and for good reason. For whatever reason, the producers decided that they didn't want to do a film with just the TNG cast, which doesn't make sense, given how successful TNG was when it was on TV. But instead, shoehorn in William Shatner as a focal plot point. I don't get it. Visually, the film looks great. The cast and crew all easily slide back into their roles. The special effects are wonderful. This is the first film that started using digital models of the ships, which looks really nice. And other than the lazy writing and tacked on original series stuff, I mean, the film was pretty good. I don't know, it just doesn't have the same rewatch value as the others. Generations, despite being poorly written, made enough money that it was followed up with a sequel. And in 1996, First Contact debuted. The film picks up some time after Generations and features two favorite plot devices from Star Trek, time travel and the Borg. The film opens with a massive battle, with Starfleet trying to stop another Borg invasion of the Federation, which results in the Borg traveling backward in time to assimilate Earth in the past. Somehow shielded from the changes in the timeline, the crew of the Enterprise travels back through time to stop the Borg from assimilating the past and ensure that history unfolds as it should. The film saw Jonathan Frakes direct his first feature film and saw new uniforms, lavish production design, and a brand new Enterprise. First Contact is a film that I personally love, despite some of the laziness in the writing. Jonathan Frakes brings a wonderful vision to the film. He directs it almost like a horror movie, with the Borg scurrying around and grabbing people in the shadows. It's terrifying. But I did like the lavish set design. I liked the updated uniforms. I liked the new Enterprise. The only thing I didn't really care for was the Borg have a queen now. I liked them better in the show when they were just kind of operating at the speed of thought, which was terrifying. I do understand that they need a foil for the crew to face off against, and just them going against a faceless enemy might have been difficult to do on film, but even so, it kind of demystified them a bit, and they just weren't as scary after that. I did like that they delved into some of the PTSD that Picard suffered as a result of being assimilated by the Borg. The one thing that completely contradicted what was happened in the show was the fact that they didn't want him to face off against them again, even though he had previously in the show. I was like, you guys watched the show, right? Like, you're not... Anyway. That being said, it was a really good movie. It had great special effects, and I think this was the last film that actually used a lot of practical effects for the ships and whatnot, so it was a nice way for them to go out. Being a monumental success, First Contact warranted a sequel, and we got one in 1998 with Star Trek Insurrection. The film was again directed by Jonathan Frakes and depicts the crew of the Enterprise E as they discover a plot to remove an entire population from a planet and face off not only against the villainous aliens the Sona, but the Federation itself. Insurrection is not one of the better Star Trek films. Um, Jonathan Frakes directs the film with a wonderful eye again, but everything around him seems uninspired. The costume design is lazy, everything's just shades of brown. Um, the special effects for the ships look terrible. They look like a poorly rendered video game cutscene or something that you would see on TV in the late 90s or early 2000s. They were just like, people have come to expect more from Star Trek special effects, and this one was just lazy. Um, Everything else about the film just seemed like hobbled together really, really quickly. It felt like a lazy two-parter of The Next Generation, which would have been fine if it was on TV, but it needed to be bigger and grander, and Insurrection in that regard kind of fell flat, and which is too bad because this cast is magnificent and they deserved better. While not the best film, Insurrection was still a successful enough film and eventually led to Star Trek Nemesis. Nemesis sucks. Oh boy, it sucks. The film opens with a coup in the Romulan Senate with a new leader taking power. The crew of the Enterprise are ordered to Romulus afterward to investigate the situation, where Picard comes face to face with Shinzon, a clone of himself played by Tom Hardy. Shinzon is revealed to have a massive doomsday weapon he plans to use against the Federation and wipe them out for good. Nemesis really sucked. I mean, really sucked. Um, Unfortunately, it was the last film with the Next Generation cast, and it was billed as a huge event for them to go out on, but it really tanked. Like, it really tanked. It was just so lazily written, and everything about it was uninspired and lazy, and it was just. I did like that Riker and Troy finally got married. I mean, they were building to that over the entire show and the film run so far, and it was nice to see that finally paid off. I did like the plot device of the Romulans using a clone to replace Picard, because they're crafty and sneaky, and that seems like something they would do. But the rest of the film is just a mess. Like, it's just a mess. Um, like, this crew is getting too old for these kinds of action movies, and the Next Generation crew is never really suited for action anyway. Captain Picard is just this wonderful British man who always tries to talk his way out of a situation instead of using violence. And this film has like a good solid half hour of just CGI ships shooting at each other. Like, they're just. It has no weight, it has no impact. Like, battle scenes in earlier Trek films had weight to them, it had impact. But these, like, CGI ships just shooting at each other, it just didn't feel important at all. And I don't know, everything about it was just uninspired. Like, a lot of the, like, every single plot point in this, with the exception of the clone, I think, was just taken directly from previous Trek films that came before it. So, I don't know. It's just lazy and it's just bad. It's so bad. Bottom line, the Next Generation Trek films tend to suck. Generations had potential not to suck, but ultimately failed, resulting in a weird hodgepodge of the original series and the Next Generation. First Contact was great, even if the writing ended up with some plot holes and nonsensical stuff. Insurrection was just average and lazy, and Nemesis was just awful. The writing for the Next Generation films didn't do justice at all to the quality we'd come to expect from the show, and, well, nothing from those shows came close to what we'd expect from the show. The original series films worked because they took what worked about the show and made it bigger with higher stakes and a budget big enough to tell the stories they wanted to tell. But the Next Generation films, not so much. While not the worst films I've ever seen, we'll get to those another time, the Next Generation films are kind of a mixed bag. They're just average. They look good with the exception of Insurrection, and they're well acted, but they're all lazily written. I think with a little more effort, these could have been really, really great. But as they are, they're just average, and then they really, really sucked. When they're good, they're just okay. But when they're bad, they're really, really bad. But stay tuned to the channel, where in my next entry I'll be delving into the J.J. Abrams films. And then that'll be Star Trek over and done with, and then we'll have some new reviews coming your way soon. This is Cinescape, signing off.